Number 2.
This last summer, I was working the day shift at Subway. It was about 6 a.m. to 2:30. At my restaurant, not sure if it's this way with other franchises, another employee does not come in until about 9. The store is officially open at 7. On this particular day, it was gloomy out. This is pretty odd for California. I got to work like normal and rushed around making bread until 7 when I had to open the doors. While running in and out of the back room, I noticed a man with messy hair and a torn black t-shirt. Considering it was raining out and around 7 in the morning, I found that a bit odd. I didn't pay him much attention until I came out to set some tables, and he was at a bench about 30 feet from me, just staring. It was then I started to get creeped out. I was a 16-year-old girl working alone in a deserted area. I gave him a little nod to acknowledge that I saw him looking, but his expression didn't change. I walked back into the store and decided to just try and forget about it. I got back to working on the 1,000 things I had to do in the back, and while I was cutting tomatoes, I heard the door to the front slam. I peeked up at the mirrors we have angled to see if people are in the front, and sure enough, he was there. Pretty soon, he started yelling in a deep, raspy voice.
"Hello? I know you're in there. I saw you."
I sighed and took off my gloves, putting on my food service smile, and asked him the usual question.
"Hi, sorry I missed you. I was prepping. Would you like a sandwich?"
He shook his head in response, a little more than what is considered normal. I asked him,
"What could I help you with?"
He looked around the store, kind of like a crazy person. His eyes were scanning everything. I was getting scared that he was going to pull out a weapon, since his hands were in his pockets. Our store was off the freeway, and it would be easy for him to escape.
"The phone. Do you have a phone? Can I call someone with your phone?"
He sounded off. At the time I did not know it was against policy to let him use the phone. I think now, if I knew that, I probably would have just let him have the phone anyway, just to be safe.
Sure.
I then grabbed the phone from under the register and watched him pretend to dial a number. His conversation went something like this.
"Hey, yeah man, I got robbed last night. Took everything. Are you coming?" "Okay, see you soon."
His responses were too close together, and he did not give his location. I realized he was faking a call, but I had no idea why.
"Can I sit here? My buddy is coming for me,"
he asked. I hesitated, but nodded. I looked down at the register and realized it was only 7:20. Nobody would be here for quite some time. The man took a seat in one of the chairs facing the register. He stared at me while I tried to pretend he wasn't there. When he looked away, I got a better look at him. He was in a regular black t-shirt that looked like it had been cut with scissors in a line across his chest. His shorts, socks, and beat-up Vans were all black as well. He looked around 40, white, and his jaw had a 5 o'clock shadow. His face was dirty too. Pretty soon, he looked back to me and then spoke.
"Yeah, I got robbed last night in the parking lot. They stole my wallet at knife point."
I looked up and nodded.
"I'm sorry. Are you okay?"
He shrugged and didn't respond. I offered him a cup of water and he accepted it. When he came over, I noticed that the slice in his shirt, it had no gash showing underneath. I have cut up plenty of tees and know that these cuts, they were put there on purpose, not by some random robbery. Also, the timers for the bread and meatballs, they went off, and it surprised me and made me jump. Yet him, as a victim of a robbery, he didn't jump at all. He just kept his gaze out the window, waiting for his friend. So I was feeling that the robbery was in fact a lie. I went in the back and kept working. I couldn't believe how slow the store was and that no other customers had come in already. It was already 8 o'clock, and pretty soon I got a text from my coworker.
"Throwing up. Nobody can come in till 11. Hope you aren't behind."
I looked at my phone in disbelief. I was going to be alone for another 3 hours. Another timer went off and I had to go back to the front.
"Wow, you work hard, pretty girl,"
he said. I nodded and continued to put bread in the oven.
"How old are you?"
I turned around and realized he was leaning over the counter now.
16?
I hoped at the time that he was a crazy person and would hear that I'm not legal and would back off. Instead, he smiled, revealing yellow cracked teeth.
I should have called in sick,
I thought.
Young and beautiful,
he said. I said thank you and rushed into the back. He remained leaning over the counter, trying to look in the back.
What's a young miner doing working so early in the morning, alone?
He put a lot of emphasis on the alone part. A chill went down my spine. I quickly pulled out my cell phone and prayed my boyfriend was around his phone. I texted him, "Can you please call my work phone? There's a creepy man. If I don't pick up, I'm not okay. He's wearing all black, ripped t-shirt and shorts. Call 911 if I don't." 5 minutes later, he texted back, "Okay." I heard the phone ring and felt so relieved. I answered and pretended I was getting a call from a co-worker saying she was on her way. I saw the man's ears perk up. He then moved back over by the window and was watching outside. I hoped my lie was working. I hung up the phone and went back to prepping tomatoes. I looked out and saw that in the parking lot there was a brown, beat-up van that was sitting in the dead center. No cars around except that one. The car was running, and inside I could see two men just sitting there. One in a black hoodie and the other in a button-up shirt. I was very confused and realized that the creepy man was looking at them too. I saw the man in black wave his hand out the window, and the creepy man nodded in response. My heart began pounding again. He got up and sauntered around the dining area, humming the tune of what I believe was Pop Goes the Weasel. I texted my boyfriend again and told him about the van and the singing, and he texted me back to grab a knife from the back. I grabbed the sharpest knife we had and waited.
You know what, hun? It's bad customer service to be in the back with a customer out here. Won't those cameras catch you?
He pointed to all the 360 cameras that the owner could monitor. I realized he was trying to ask about the cameras to see if they worked. I texted my boyfriend now to call 911 and have them come immediately. I peeked around the corner and saw he was at the register again. I noticed the brown van was now backed in a parking space right in front of the store's doors. He noticed my stare and smirked.
Oh no, you aren't ready to meet my friends yet.
I gripped my knife tighter. I had no escape there. There were no emergency exits and no locks on the doors. The manager's office was locked, and if I got into one of the coolers, the man would just come in. I decided to laugh and tried to play him off.
If they have big appetites and want a big order, then I guess you're right.
His smile didn't waver as he said,
What we crave isn't on the menu.
I smiled and pretended I didn't understand, then turned and went to walk into the fridge with a knife and phone. I stood in there and held the handle, freezing my ass off and praying that the cops would hurry up. I slowly opened the door after a few minutes and heard his voice right behind it. He was in the back, with me.
No need to hide, lovely. You're just easier to catch in there.
I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I shut the door again and held onto it with all my might. I could feel him pulling, and then all of a sudden, not anymore. I didn't fall for it, and I just stayed in the cooler. A few minutes went by, then 10, and he didn't pull again. I pushed open the door cautiously and wielded my knife. The back room, it was empty. My heart pounded in my chest and my palms felt clammy. I looked at the mirrors, checked the freezer and any corner, but he was gone. I looked outside and the van, it was gone as well. I believed it was too good to be true. I saw both keys to the bathroom were behind the counter still, so I grabbed both and ran out to the women's restroom. Once inside with the keys, the door was locked to the outside. I waited for another 15 minutes before I heard the sirens outside. Relieved, more than I can express in words, I came out and greeted the police. They searched the entire store, but they found nothing. The van was nowhere to be found along with the creepy man and the men in the van. I told the police what had happened. They told me I'd acted well and that a man with a similar story had done the same to another store in our county. But in that story, the woman working had locked herself in the bathroom first, and the guy got away. I never knew what happened with that man, if he was caught or if he caught someone else. I called someone to come in for me that day, and I went home early. For the next few days, I asked not to open, and 2 weeks later ended up leaving my job entirely. I still have nightmares over it. I don't know why he left so abruptly, or why his friends did not come in too. I don't know what they would have done to me, but I can only imagine it would have been horrific. I am thankful I walked away with my life, and I am thankful I thought quickly. Number 1. I live in a pretty rural but well-to-do suburb. I live in a 5-bedroom house on an almost 2-hectare property. It's a long narrow house wrapping into an L shape at the end of a long steep driveway. At the end of the driveway, you can pretty much pull up next to the pool. There's a gate sort of cutting the yard in half. You know, kids, dog, etc. But once you enter through there, you can pretty much enter the house from the back deck. At this time, I had my second child, and she was only 6 weeks old, and my son was almost 2. My husband often works away on country runs. He's a truck driver. One afternoon, he was leaving on another run. Normally, he's all about business, so he packs up, kisses me and the kids, gives me a chicken. It's a cute couple thing, where we hold out our palm and the other pecks out of the other's hand, and we usually say chicken. Lame, I know, but it's our thing. Anyway, he's on his way. This particular afternoon, it seemed like he was being deliberately slow, stalling almost. I asked him if everything was alright, and he stalled but then nodded. He walked out to the back deck and patted our dog, Alfie, but told him to stay. I have to say, I was a bit taken aback. Alfie goes on every country run with him. Even the dog looked confused. I called out to him and asked him again.
What's wrong, babe? You seem anxious.
I had my daughter in my arms, and she started to fuss. He took her from my arms and soothed her, giving her an extra big kiss and cuddle. He stared at me and handed her back over. He softly broke the weirdness and said,
I just don't feel right. My gut is telling me to stay.
I thought he was just being soft, wanting to stay home with the new baby, etc. I reassured him, we'll be fine, you'll be home soon. This run was a 6-day return trip, and believe me, this was a short run. He nodded and agreed with me. With that, he gave us a final kiss, a chicken and a cuddle, and off he went. Fast forward to later that night, I get a text from him. Now, normally his arrival texts are,
Here safe, staying in insert town, love you.
So this was out of the blue. His text said,
Hey baby, I've turned around. I feel really uneasy. Please, lock all the doors and the windows. I'll be home in a few hours.
I was annoyed. He was the sole breadwinner and this was a $5,000 job. Just because he had a bad feeling, but he had already turned around, so what could I do? I replied with,
Okay, hun, see you soon.
He replied with,
Love you. Oh, and keep an eye on Alfie. He's a bit funny when I've left.
Which was true. The dog hadn't moved from his bed since he left. Poor thing looked depressed. Anyway, it was about 8 p.m. My boy was in bed and I was just finishing feeding my baby girl. I was sitting in the kitchen and I saw Alfie leap onto all fours from his bed and start growling. Now, he's a shepherd mix and they'll bark at their own shadow, but growling is another matter. I just assumed it was a cat or something he saw out in the distance. Either way, I opened the sliding door and hissed at him to stop. I wasn't putting these kids back to sleep again. He looked at me and calmed down. He sat down but was still watching. I shut the door and laid my baby down in her crib. I jumped on the computer for 30 minutes so I could just have some me time. Just as I was looking at my emails, there was a knock at the door. Now, as I said, I live in a long, narrow house, so it's quite a walk to the door. As I got up to answer, I stopped in my tracks. 1. It's 8:15 now. Who's knocking? 2. I heard no truck. Everyone knows the sound of a B double when it pulls up. 3. My husband has keys, and further to that, we mainly use the back door as the house entrance. My heart started to race. They knocked again. By this point, Alfie started going off. I wanted to yell at the dog to stop, but I didn't want to wake the kids. I walked a little further down the hall and started to rationalize. Maybe it is my husband. Maybe something happened to the truck and he had to get a ride home or walk. I reached the door and peeked through the curtain of the front door. It definitely wasn't my husband. Whoever this was a lot taller and thinner. I flicked on the outside light, but nothing.
The bulb must have gone.
I was right in front of the door and I heard a desperate voice on the side of the door.
Hello?
I'm sorry to come so late. I'm really sorry, but I'm hurt.
I felt really bad, and I went to turn the knob when he spoke again.
I'm really sorry. I had a car accident and your house was the closest. Please, I'm bleeding a lot.
As I said, I live in a really rural area and it's quite a winding road. I felt really bad for him and decided to open the door. The door chain was still attached. I looked through the gap in the door and saw this man, barely in the moonlight. I whispered out,
You're hurt?
I saw his shadow nod. He replied, but his voice changed, much calmer than his desperate expression previously.
Yeah, I wrecked my car in the bend. Could I please use your phone? I can't find mine.
I reached for the door chain to release it, and in my peripheral, I saw another shadow behind him. It froze my hand immediately. My gut was screaming, no. I said in my calmest voice,
I'll call the ambulance for you.
And shut and deadbolted the door. He started screaming,
No, let me in. Let me in, you bitch. I need help, you stupid bitch. Just let me in.
I ran down the hall and was heading towards my phone, which was in the kitchen, but I stopped outside my son's room and listened. He wasn't screaming anymore, but something more frightening. Alfie wasn't barking anymore either. I ran into my son's room. He was still asleep. I scooped him up and ran into my bedroom. I opened my walk-in closet and laid down in there. Then collected my baby and placed her in her carrier and then placed her in the closet as well. They were both sound asleep, and I sure as shit wasn't about to let anything happen to them. I locked them in the closet and crawled towards my phone. I stopped myself in the lounge room to listen for noises. I heard 2 voices and at least 3 sets of feet. They were running around the property, trying to get entry. I was crouched down and tried to see where I had left my phone. I saw it on the kitchen bench. I poked my head around the corner to see if I could see anyone on the deck. I kept thinking if they saw me go for my phone through the sliding doors, they might amp up their assault. I kept my eye on the door and gingerly squatted towards the kitchen bench. At the corner of my eye, I see the man's shadow. I turned to look, and he had his face pressed up against the door. I saw his needle-thin features clearly from the moonlight. I dove back into the lounge room, and they started going off, banging on the glass, windows, walls, screaming, just trying to incite terror, and I was terrified. I clutched my phone in my hand, thinking through my options. I knew the nearest police station was a good 40 minutes away, and even if they had someone local, they still wouldn't be here for a while. Then, I remembered, my husband had turned around. I shakily held my phone and called my husband. These people were still hammering the house, looking for a weak spot to get through, it seemed. My husband picked up on the 6th ring.
Yellow, babe?
How far away are you?
I couldn't hide the panic in my voice. I heard the truck speed up in the background.
15, but I'll make it in 10. What happened?
There's people here. They're trying to get into the house. I haven't called the police.
He cut me off.
Call them then.
He then said something that made my stomach drop.
Get an ambulance too. These fuckers will die tonight.
I couldn't respond. I mean, how can you? In my silence, he called me back.
Babe, get the negotiator and sit tight, but call the cops.
Okay,
I cried through the phone. The negotiator was a steel bat I had in the walk-in cupboard. I called the police and advised that we were under attack and I was at home with 2 small kids. The dispatcher said that she was sending someone and to just bunker down with my kids. I went to the walk-in and checked on the kids, both still asleep. Phew. I grabbed the negotiator and sat in the cupboard in front of my kids, negotiator on my lap. I sat with my mind racing. Was every window locked? Every door? What had they done to Alfie? What do they want? That was the biggest question. We lived in a nice area, but it wasn't the most fancy house. We were well off, but by no means rich, and even if they just wanted money or our things, Surely they would have given up by now. It had been a good 5 minutes. Surely they would have known that I called someone. I sat in my cupboard when it started to get quiet. The blinds were drawn in my bedroom window, but I could still see shadows outside. That's when I heard thuds on the roof, like someone was jumping on it. It was a corrugated roof, so leaves falling make a noise. They're on the roof, and just as I was questioning why they would get on the roof, I heard a crack from the ceiling. It rippled through me. They were trying to get through the skylight. The skylight was located in the middle of the hallway. I heard another crack. They were definitely trying to bust their way through it. I heard 3 sets of feet on the roof now, then 3 separate hits on the skylight. They were working together to crack it. What do I do? If they somehow make it through this light, they would be less than a meter from my room. The banging was getting more intense now, and I definitely heard pieces fall to the floor. I had to get out. I jumped up and looked at my kids. We had to get out. I found a scarf I had hanging in my cupboard and wrapped it around myself and tied it tight around my shoulder. I made sure it was secure enough to put my baby in it. I picked up my 2-year-old and he started to stir. I had his hand and let him walk next to me. I whispered to be quiet. I opened my bedroom door and stuck my head into the hall. The banging was so loud it woke my 2-year-old completely with a jump. I saw all this debris on the floor and legged it to the back door. I held on tight to my kids and wrenched open the sliding glass door and just ran. I held my son and I practically jumped off the 3 steps and ran as fast as my legs would carry me up our driveway. My son was screaming and crying, "Alfie!" I attempted to soothe him, but was just so focused on getting to the top of the driveway. I was hoping in the cloak of darkness and the hammering, these people wouldn't notice that I was fleeing. I finally got to the top of the driveway to the road and I spun around to look at the house. I was wrong. They noticed. The 3 of them were climbing down from the roof. I knew the nearest house was about 2 kilometers from mine, but running with 2 kids, I didn't like my chances. But I had to try. I turned left and ran on the road. I was hoping to flag down a car, or was hoping my husband would show up by now, or even the cops. Either way, I just had to get away from the house. I was getting out of breath and slowed out to look around. I couldn't see anything. They weren't following me. Maybe they did just want to rob us. They may have climbed down to go through the sliding door, which more than likely I left open. I started to slow down, just to catch my breath. The adrenaline was wearing off. I looked at my kids. My boy was crying, holding onto me tight, and my baby girl was crying, probably from being bounced around. I held them close and whispered, "We made it." I was about 100 meters away from my neighbor's property when I saw a cop car. I started waving frantically, screaming at them to stop. The cop hit his brakes hard and got out of his car.
"Officer, I called it in. I just fled with my kids, and it's my house."
He looked at me and said,
Are you hurt?
I shook my head furiously. I caught my breath and he asked,
Can you get somewhere safe?
I said,
"I'm heading to the neighbors, just there."
and pointed in their direction.
Okay, move quickly.
He said. He climbed back into the car and sped off. I reached my neighbor's house. They're an older couple, sort of grandparent figures to my kids. I explained what was going on and they got me inside straight away. Just as I entered, I saw my husband's truck whirl past towards the house. His words rang in my ears.
These fuckers will die tonight.
I froze. I didn't want my husband to go to prison for these monsters. I asked my neighbors, could they please watch the kids? I needed to get back to the house. They agreed. The male neighbor said to jump in his car and he'll run me up. We got in the car and in a couple of minutes we pulled up to my house. There were now 3 cop cars, an ambulance, and my husband's truck out the front, and a whole lot of commotion. 2 of the 3 monsters were arrested and were face down in the dirt. I saw my husband with his face in his hands leaning on the bonnet of the cop car. I ran over to him and he spun around and held me tight. Apparently, the police wouldn't let him in the house and he automatically thought the worst.
Oh, baby, I thought...
He stammered. I nodded my head. I knew what he thought. I reassured him though.
"The kids are at Patterson's."
He released me from his hold and said,
I knew I shouldn't have left. I knew it.
Just then, a police officer interrupted us. He wanted to take my statement, so I told him everything. I kept watching my husband's face descend into horror. I finished speaking with the officer and he finally said,
Sorry, but I think it would be best if you left the premises right now.
I told him that we were at the neighbours and to come speak to us when they were done. We returned to the neighbours at around 10:30 p.m. We sat and talked about every detail of the night and just how insane it was. I checked on the kids who were sleeping on the couch. My baby girl was just starting to stir. She must have been hungry. I started to feed her and sat next to my son. I patted his leg, wondering how much of this he would remember, when I noticed his pajama bottoms had blood at the bottom of them. I grabbed his feet and checked for cuts, but there was nothing. I smiled at him and said,
"It's okay, buddy. I just thought you hurt yourself."
He looked down at his feet, pointed and said,
"Alfie."
I was pretty confused for a moment, then looked at the blood, and I realized he was trying to tell me that the blood was Alfie's. My heart shattered, but I shushed him back to sleep and walked out to the patio where my husband was and asked him,
"Did you see Alfie?"
He immediately burst into tears. To be honest, I hadn't noticed Alfie, or even thought about him until now. It sounds horrible, I know, but I was just so focused on getting out with my kids. I went to hold my husband, and he brushed me off and exhaled,
They killed him. It was the first thing I saw when I ran for the house.
He started crying again.
I thought if they could do that to a dog, what could they have done to you?
I looked at him, puzzled. He clarified,
Babe, they split his head in two.
I immediately burst into tears. How sick. Poor Alfie. In that moment, we saw a cop car turning into our neighbour's driveway. I dried my face, waiting for him to approach us. It was the same cop who met me on the road. He came to advise me that they caught all 3 home invaders and that they had been transferred to the station. A sense of relief washed over me. He then gave me a detailed account of what they found. He said that after I had fled the house, they entered and had destroyed everything in their path, smashing pictures, walls, clothes. They went from room to room, just hell-bent on causing as much damage as possible. He also told us that they didn't take anything. It was purely for something to do. He said that they had a whole arsenal of weapons in their van, which was parked about 300 meters up the road from my house. It included meat tenderizers, various knives and sharp objects, shovels, ropes, plastic tubes, and ice picks. However, what they had on them, they were armed with crowbars, hammers, a Bowie knife, a Sharpie marker, a coat hanger, and a barbecue lighter. I asked the officer, why us? And he really couldn't answer it. He asked the main guy, the one who came to the door, the same thing, and he didn't say a thing. The officer looked sick when he said this. He told us that it was something he had never really seen before. The officer said, more than likely, they had noticed that I was on my own that night and knew I'd be vulnerable. My husband piped up and said,
Living so far out, they probably would have known that the police would have been far away also.
I thought that must have meant that they were local then. I mean, unless they're out in the sticks. You know how long a cop car would take to come out? I don't know what was more disturbing, a random attack on a random house or being watched by someone nearby. We weren't supposed to go back into the house as it was a crime scene, but my husband convinced the officer that we needed nappies and clothes, etc. So, the next morning, under the supervision of the officer, we returned to grab a few things. He returned with his truck, and he was angry and crying, and just a general mess. He hastily jumped out, and I met him in the front door of our neighbour's house. He grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me in tight. I looked at his face for an explanation. He spat out,
They knew us.
"What do you mean?"
I said. He explained, just to add to our house's ultimate destruction, they had a Sharpie attack, scribbling things about us all over the walls, but not incoherent nonsense. Things about us. Specific details, like on my kitchen bench, baby feeds every 3 hours. On the living room wall, the boy likes Transformers. In our home office, 6-day run, 6-day run. In our bedroom though, he said it was pure insanity. On our rear wall, someone had written chicken over and over again on the walk-in cupboard door with a big arrow, the negotiator. The steel bat was rested neatly on the door. He said that my son's and daughter's room had no graffiti, but the rest of the hall had scribbles of dates and times. 18th, playgroup at 11 a.m. 2:15 p.m, talked on the phone. Then he got to the front door. In perfect penmanship, someone had written, "Lucky she could run fast." Looking at this, he got what he needed and booked it out of there. I felt sick. These people clearly had been watching for a while and knew everything about us. Everything. We stayed with my sister for a while, and my partner went back and forth to the house, clearing out and fixing it up. We could finally come back home after a while, but I really didn't like it, and it took me forever to feel normal being home alone again. The three were 19, 18, and 21, and I found out later that combined they had a rap sheet for a stack of crimes, including stalking, rape of a minor, break and enter, malicious harassment, and grievous bodily harm, all committed in the surrounding towns. These are hard crimes, but they were too young and were given rehabilitation, counselling, or short stints in detention. However, for what they did to my family and my house, they were sentenced between 7 and 12 years. I heard that the Needle Thing guy laughed at his conviction. Yep, definitely that psychopath is going to rehabilitate. I often now sit in my house and that feeling of terror washes over me. To know how close me and my children were from being someone's gruesome entertainment for the night, I try to shake those feelings off, because even though we painted the walls and fixed the damage and it looks like a new place, I can't walk through my front door. I always use the rear door as the entrance. Even though we have put 3 or 4 coats of paint on the door, I can still see, "Lucky she runs fast." G'day mates, it's Busta here. Wow, those 2 stories were intense. Kudos to both of those women for looking after themselves and their kids. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here. And for the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. Keep them coming guys as well, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also guys, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. And also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous. Please also change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So guys, I wanted to let you know that I may be setting up a Patreon account soon. Many of you may not know what a Patreon account is, but basically it's a way for some of you guys to support me financially so that I can continue to make great videos and perhaps even go full time on YouTube. The Patreon system is set up so that those who wish can voluntarily flick $1 or $2 my way for each video I create. My videos will always be free here on YouTube, but if I'm ever going to go full time on YouTube, something like this could provide a solid income for myself and my family to survive off of. I hate to penny push something like this, but the reality is that if I'm ever going to go full time on YouTube, then I'm going to need some more security than what YouTube can offer through the AdSense system. Also, with YouTube Red now here, and with so many people not wanting to throw money at YouTube necessarily, but also wanting to support their favourite content creators financially, I think creating a Patreon account can provide a solution to this dilemma and kind of circumnavigates around YouTube a little. But before I make something like this and invest the time I need into it, I'd like to know from you guys what you think. Let me know in the comments below if you think this is a good idea or if you think I should try something else. I'm always open to ideas. Also guys, we've almost hit 200,000 subscribers. That's crazy. And given all the copyright stuff and Halloween and everything really, I haven't had a chance to really plan anything. So I'm not sure if I'll get to do anything special for the milestone, but if I could do something, what would you guys like to see? Let me know in the comments below. And finally guys, as always, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for updates throughout the week. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you mates in the next one.